Hey there, students, and I am broadcasting live, and I'm actually recording an episode of my podcast, which of course will be here on YouTube as well for at least the next few days. I'll definitely have it up through Election Day, but not only do I have a website, now I have a podcast, and I'm trying to record regularly. The Tom Richey Podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and Podomatic. So just go to any of those places and search for Tom Richey, and you are sure to find the podcast. Now, the podcast is where I plan to go with things that this is how my studies of history and politics, possibly even religion, philosophy, how these things are impacting my life. And sometimes I have some great guests on, Dr. Greg Sadler, who has a YouTube channel, a philosophy YouTube channel, philosophy professor, really brilliant guy. He joins me sometimes, and maybe some of you will join me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to record the podcast, and then I'm going to take questions, okay? And we're going to turn that off. All right. So we've got some people here, and what I want to do here, and I'll take other questions, okay? I will take other questions as we finish, but the first questions I'll take are going to be related to this, okay? So I'm going to record the podcast segment, the podcast, as a YouTube video, and then I will take questions about it, okay? So let's go ahead and get this ready, and let me make sure I've got everything. Stay hydrated, kids. I've got my water. I've got some vervain tea, which of course has the added benefit of keeping you from being compelled by a vampire. So that's something that is very helpful, especially around election time when you want to cast your own ballot. If you plan on voting, which I think voting is great if you plan to do that. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and get into this. Yes, Keith, I tell you what, they're trying to stop you here. Now, Cal MCYOU apostrophe RE. Okay, so we'll go ahead, Keith. We're going to show that comment. Why not? I don't know about that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the recording. And remember, when I'm finished, I will take some questions, but I'm going to explain why it is that I do not plan to vote in the upcoming election. All right, podcast audio is recording. All right, so remember, check out the Tom Richey Podcast, but of course, it's right here as well. On the last episode of this podcast, I had an extensive discussion with Dr. Greg Sadler, who has his YouTube channel, which is Gregory Sadler, all kinds of great philosophy from a philosophy professor who has a PhD. And we talked a lot about the significance of the political community and my own struggle with whether to vote or not. Now, in previous elections, I've always voted, and I certainly don't have anything against voting. In fact, if you want to vote, if you are inclined to vote, you should vote. But I do see a lot of the same thing being said over and over again, where it gets to be, I've even been attacked for this position when I've said that I've considered not voting. And now I'm not saying that this is characteristic of social studies teachers, but there are a few that have come after me and said that I'm saying something that is just fundamentally irresponsible and against the values of my profession, which I think is a reason why I need to come over here and give an apology, so to speak, but a classical apology, an explanation, a defense of my own decision. Now, let me start off with a few disclaimers. I'm not trying to discourage voting. Okay. And I also don't think that I'm capable of that. When people say, oh, Tom Richey, you've got followers that are young and impressionable, I'm thinking, okay, if somebody is so impressionable that when I say that I'm not voting and they say, oh, Tom Richey's not voting, I shouldn't vote. You probably shouldn't be voting if that's really like your motivation for voting. If it's so fickle that I would persuade you not to vote, I think that's asinine. All right. The idea that I would have that kind of influence. And so the thing is, what I want to drive home, I was reading an article in Reason magazine that said it's okay not to vote. Okay. And that is the point that I'm making, is that neither I nor anybody else should not not feel like bad people just because we choose not to vote in a particular election. Now, secondly, I'm only speaking of this particular election. I'm not turning in my voter registration or anything like that. I've just looked at this election and I've thought I don't think that there's really any compelling reason for me to vote. I'm not protesting anything. I'm not, unless perhaps sitting out of the current political climate, which I think has been very unhealthy, which I'll go into more in a bit. Now, also, I reserve the right to change my mind on election day if I decide all of a sudden, you know what, I think this is important that I should go vote. I reserve that right, and I think that Americans all have that right, not only to decide who to vote for, but that decision to decide whether to vote or not without being shamed for it. Now, also, I believe that the ability to vote is very important. I believe voting rights are important, but just as I believe all kinds of rights are important, some of them which I use on a regular basis and some I don't. Okay, so with those disclaimers out of the way, so before anybody's trying to burn me at the stake for some kind of heresy against teaching social studies, then let me go into the reasons why I have decided in this election not to vote. Now, first of all, I believe that decisions like this should be approached rationally. And some of you who have taken AP European history, you've seen my video about Rene Descartes. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And this is really our most fundamental human characteristic, is our ability to think rationally and to decide things for ourselves. Now, in Descartes' case, he said that it is a good thing to doubt everything at least once. In fact, cogito ergo sum, that was Rene Descartes doubting his existence. And then he thought, well, wait, I'm thinking, so what exists must think, deductive reasoning, all of that kind of stuff. And so therefore I must exist because I'm thinking. And I believe that this kind of critical thinking is important. And this is why I teach, to teach people to think critically. It is not my job as a teacher to tell you to go vote. It is my job as a teacher to get you to think about the political process rationally, in spite of all the politicians who want you to think about it irrationally and see yourself as fundamentally threatened if the election goes a certain way. But look at it rationally and make a decision for yourself whether you want to vote and who you want to vote for. And I think that I'm doing a much greater service as a teacher telling people to look at the entire process critically than I am by just saying blindly, you need to go vote, you need to go vote, you need to go vote, and join the chorus of people in my profession rather than thinking, hey, I think that this should be an individual decision. Now, my next point, what is really at stake here? Okay, so first of all, I live in a safe congressional district. That is part of my calculus for not voting. I think Congressman Jeff Duncan, if he's watching, if he hears I'm not voting for him, I hope he doesn't take it personally. I think he's doing a great job, but he's going to win. All right. I live in a gerrymandered district, as most Americans do. Most of us live in a district that is a safe Democratic or a safe Republican district. And we can say anything we want about what we think of this, but it is what is. Okay. That most of you, your congressional vote will not matter. You wonder why turnout is higher in countries that have parliamentary democracies. It's because their vote matters. And so if Reno in the Netherlands votes for the party of the animals, he can see some seats. That's actually a real thing, that in the Netherlands, there is a party of the animals. And out of 150 seats in their legislature, the party of the animals has, I think, maybe 4 or something like that. So if I believed that by voting, I could influence Congress, I would think, sure. Now that goes into, for those of you taking AP government, political efficacy. How much difference does it make whether or not I vote? And so then, well, what about local elections, Richie? Well, I was talking to a friend of mine on Halloween, and we were trick-or-treating with our kids, and he had a city council sign in his yard. And he was talking about what idiots everybody on the city council is. He says, it's just a bunch of idiots, a bunch of idiots. And I asked him, what about this guy whose sign is in your front yard? Is he an idiot? He said, yeah, he's an idiot, but not as big of an idiot as the people that are on there now. And so when I think about that, am I supposed to go vote in a local election because this guy is a little less of an idiot than the other people? Now, if there is a local election and you believe that the person that you're voting for will bring about real change and that there's something to be gained from it, by all means, go vote. I think that local elections are where you could have the most influence. So if you feel compelled to influence a local election and you are dedicated to that, also if you're not a low information voter, okay, because that I think is something we have to think about. Like in 2010 here in South Carolina, where a guy named Alvin Green won the Democratic primary. And Alvin Green had been arrested for looking at porn in a University of South Carolina computer lab kind of recently before that, but people didn't know who he was. So the whole idea that voting has a positive intrinsic value, it doesn't withstand strict scrutiny. That if there's somebody who is low information or dispassionate, then they probably don't need to be voting in those races where they don't have all the information or that they don't really care about, because other people have information, they care, and they want to get their opinions out there and they want to vote. Which that's something that there is an article that I read that, thank you for my friend Armando for bringing this to my attention, but this was an article in New York Magazine, 12 young people on why they probably won't vote. And one of the people said, and I think this came from a few of the people, that I'm not really sure if I'm right. And the thing is that if somebody's not really sure if they're right, if they have all the correct information, then there's no shame in deciding that you're not going to vote because you would rather leave that to people who have the information or who care about it more than you do. And so as far as that, I'm not going to be dragged in by all of these calls that people make that are all emotional. Okay, they're not rational, but it's just things are so bad right now. And if you don't vote, things are just, oh my goodness, they're just going to spin out of control. And next thing you know, we're going to be another totalitarian country or something like that. It hasn't happened yet, folks. And the thing is that American institutions are actually very, very strong. And when you think about like the total threats to your life, are they really as bad as the politicians say they are? Or if we do a point of view analysis, we see that politicians want us to get emotional and want us to get frenzied because it brings money in. It gets votes out there. It contributes to their will to power. Look at that whole Kavanaugh thing, that there were so many emotions back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. End of the day, he's on the Supreme Court. All right. And groups on both sides have used this for political gain. And I have decided that in this election cycle, I do not want to be used. And so I'm not going to. Next. There are many forms of civic engagement. And I think this is really where a lot of this analysis misses the mark. That when teachers are saying vote, 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 okay, uncritically, vote, 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 vote. But what about do something that will actually help your community? In the article in Reason Magazine, the subtitle is that if you want to help your community, let's see. So the actual subtitle, I want to make sure that I don't get this wrong. It's okay not to vote. Instead, you can do something that will actually make the world a better place, which is basically anything else. And so the thing is, when it comes down to it, I think that my job as a social studies teacher, I need to be telling people, do something for your community. Civic engagement is more than voting. And I think that there is this self-congratulatory culture. There are these stickers. I voted, I voted, I voted, which I never wear the stickers because I always thought, wouldn't it be such a tragedy if I'm wearing one of those stickers and a low information voter thinks, oh, was there an election today? I should go vote in that because that's my civic duty. And they go vote. And I'm thinking, well, you didn't even know there was an election today? Why? And the thing is, I feel like that sticker, it's people are patting themselves on the back. And they feel as if they've done enough. And all they did was choose a faction. Okay. My friend Amelie on Twitter sent me a link to something called Operation American Gratitude. And this is something that some Americans founded, that they realized that a lot of Vietnam veterans, they came back from their service in Vietnam and people were spitting on them. They were doing all kinds of awful stuff. And World War II veterans, they got a parade when they got back. And so this Operation American Gratitude, they find these Vietnam veterans that were never thanked thanked when they got home, and they thanked them for their service to their country. I think that's amazing. And the people that are doing this are doing so much more than voting. I went to my favorite barbecue place, a Black Smokehouse in Seneca, South Carolina, if anybody's interested. And when I got there, the football team at my high school was seated over there. People were like, Richie, there's Tom Richey. And I was like, hey, everybody. And I was like, what's going on here? And the proprietress, the owner of the place, she said, I'm treating them. And I said, that is so nice that she decided to have the football team over and she is feeding them all barbecue. Okay. Kim Black is doing a service for her community. And if she wants to vote, I think that that's great. But I think that what she did on Friday, what I witnessed, was so much more important to the community than voting. And it's not choosing a side, it's doing something that actually benefits the community as a whole. And I think that we're missing the boat when we talk about voting, and we're not talking about what is it you could do over here that no matter whether somebody's a Democrat or Republican, independent, they can benefit from. Okay, which is why I'm contemplating, and I'll put something out on my social media that I'm contemplating offering some free tutoring this week, because I want to show that, look, in lieu of voting, I actually want to do something that can help people. Okay, that can help people that are in my country, help them learn, because one-on-one tutoring is expensive. I provide that through my website, plug, right? But at the same time, every once in a while, perhaps I should offer some free tutoring sessions and do this as a civic duty. Okay, a civic duty should be something that's actually helping people and not just, oh, get out there and push a few levers and state your opinion, which may or may not be reflective of the right thing. But go out and do that. I think people need to do things that are going to help their communities. Okay. And then I want to address what I feel like is the disingenuity about appeals to vote, okay, which generic appeals to vote, especially to young people. I think a lot of times people look at how a demographic votes and they think, okay, we want more young people to vote. Well, you know what? Young people vote overwhelmingly Democratic. So there was actually a guy, because I tend to be right of center, and there was somebody that kind of playfully accused me of maybe I'm trying to suppress votes. But the thing is that I think a lot of times, now by no means all the time, but I do think that a lot of generic appeals to vote are actually from people who they believe they have a horse in the race, and they think that they will benefit from these generic appeals to vote. So it seems like there's something disingenuous about when somebody makes a generic appeal, but they're doing it for some kind of reason, which one of my teacher friends on Twitter said something about that. Well, if people don't vote, then we have the kind of government we have now. Well, the thing is, the kind of government we have now was a result of voting. But there is a partisanship at the bottom of all this. And what I'm trying to do is to do something that's not partisan, do something that's not taking sides, and thinking that my life may be a bit better for it. And let me address the whole voting as a civic duty, okay? Because this is something that often it's just like, oh my goodness. Somebody on Twitter just called me a fraud, another social studies teacher. In fact, but I want to make clear that a lot of social studies teachers have been great. They're teaching people to critically think, and I think that that's most of the profession. But I have gotten some very negative feedback, including somebody who called me a fraud, because I'm not practicing what we preach as teachers. And I think when we start to talk about what we preach and what our responsibility is, that you lose something of the individual, that the individual has a sacred right to make some of these decisions. Now, and speaking of rights, voting is a right, not a duty. When you vote, you are actually wanting to vote. You're trying to influence an election. Now, the Second Amendment is a right, but I don't think that there are many Americans who would argue that every American should own a gun. Every American should learn to shoot. Some may, but I think that it's just fine that people selectively use that right. And so when it comes down to it, think about jury duty. Jury duty, they pick the jurors off the voting rolls. So here's the thing. Jury duty is a civic duty. This is something that people generally don't want to do. You have to get off work, all of that kind of stuff. But they don't look at the citizenship rolls. They look at the voting rolls, because voting is a privilege, a right of citizenship. Okay, let me just using the two interchangeably, but I'm not calling voting a privilege. But it is one of those things. If we think in terms of privileges and immunities, then that is something that's actually a positive. Your right to vote is great, but it is a right. It's not a duty. Jury duty is a duty. Paying taxes is a civic duty. When I pay taxes, I'm doing my civic duty. I don't want to pay taxes, but I do anyway because it is my civic duty. So I reject the idea that voting is a civic duty. I believe that voting is a right, just like the First Amendment is a right. And that is what I'm using right now, trying to model getting out there and using that First Amendment right and saying that I want to talk about my personal decision not to vote in this election. Now, next point, our political system was not and has never been dependent on universal participation. That there are people who tell us, oh, American institutions are just going, okay, that if you don't vote, that everything is going to fall apart. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, and the other framers that were in Philadelphia, they never had in mind a system where everybody's voting. Now, again, what is important is that every citizen have the right to vote, that citizens' rights to vote are not suppressed, and that people who want to vote and are qualified to vote should vote. Okay, that if you are a United States citizen, you don't have a criminal record, and you are over the age of you are 18 or older, then you should be able to vote. And if you try to vote and you cannot, and you are legally allowed to vote, then that is a serious problem. Someone deciding that they want to sit out an election, or someone deciding that they want to be apolitical, that is not a problem. Okay. And so what I want to go into now is probably my most important point that I will kind of save the best for last in a way. But well, I may have one after this. And let me go ahead and do that one then. That voting is not an intrinsic good. Neither is democracy. Okay. Both of them are what we make of them. That when you think about the execution of Socrates, that was a democratic process that led to that there was a vote. Socrates was killed because of that. Why was Jesus crucified? Okay, now there are the Romans, but also when you look into that story, there is the influence of the crowd. There are a lot of times when the crowd does not say the thing that in retrospect people think, oh, that might have been a bad idea. So when it comes down to it, all of these things, that voting is an intrinsic good, democracy is an intrinsic good. I think that democracy is what is it? I think Churchill said that it's the worst form of government, except for all the other forms of government, that there is no perfect form of government. And that's one thing that Dr. Sadler and I were talking about in the last podcast, that there certainly is not a perfect form of government. And so we are citizens participating as we please in an imperfect form of government. And so let me go into this, because this is something that really goes into really the bedrock of the American idea. And it goes beyond voting, it goes beyond the Constitution. And what I'm talking about is the First Amendment: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And our current political culture, which I have participated in the past, and I've always loved politics. But our current political culture is toxic. I've lost friends in our current political culture, people that I used to get along very well with. And I'm not talking about just losing friends after a knockdown drag out. I'm talking about realizing that this person doesn't look at me the same. Like this person, because I vote differently than they do, they have identified me as a nuisance at best, an enemy at worst, somebody that personally I get along great with. But because of all of the negative energy that's in our political culture right now, then I cannot be friends with this person because I don't energize this person. Okay. And that I'll never be able to believe that this person, when they look at me, that they see a human being and a friend first. And for me, when I think about my pursuit of happiness, that my pursuit of happiness, which is a sacred right in our Declaration of Independence, that my pursuit of happiness is in educating people. My pursuit of happiness is trying to unite people. My pursuit of happiness does not it's not served by getting involved in a toxic political culture that has divided people and caused Americans to look at each other as other. And so when I say here that I don't want to vote in this election, I don't want to contribute to this current political climate, and I don't want it to affect me. And I'm thinking in terms of acting my way into believing that possibly if I don't vote, then the news will influence me less, that all of the acrimony will influence me less, that I may be able to reach more people if I can become less political. Because I think that when we say, oh, voting is an intrinsic good, what about my family? What about my work and my career? What about my friendships? Okay, is this worth losing friends over? And you might ask, well, Tom, you could vote and just keep it to yourself and all of that kind of stuff. That's just not how I roll. I tend to either do something totally or I don't. But I really believe that we have lost sight of, that person who is a Trump supporter or a Bernie supporter or whoever they are, that person is a human being. And I think that we have lost some of that. I actually got an email from a teacher that I went to a summer institute with back in 2004. And I told him, I said, yeah, he found my YouTube channel and he remembered me. And he said, do you remember me from the thing? And I'd even stopped by his house when I was passing through Arizona a bit later. And I told him, of course. And I said, one of the things that I remember most is that we would have the most like polite and engaging and fun political discussions. And I thought that was something that I had really, really fond memories of, was being able to talk to someone who voted differently than I did, who believed differently than I did, and really be able to appreciate that person and the ideological diversity that person brought to the table. And I think that our current political culture has made us seriously lose sight of this. And when we uncritically vote, you must participate in this culture. I, as a social studies teacher, must tell you to participate in this culture. This is an intrinsic good. Don't think, don't look at it critically. Vote. That is not my job. My job is to be honest, and my job is to tell you to look at it as you want to, and to make a decision and to pursue happiness. I mean, that is really what I do. Okay. That if I can help you with your pursuit of happiness, then I am doing my job as a teacher. If I steer you in a direction that may not be in accordance with your pursuit of happiness, then I am not doing my job, that I am a failure as a teacher. And so a few things here that I hope that this was profitable. Maybe some teachers will show this in their class as just another perspective in the marketplace of ideas, okay? Because what I'm saying is not dangerous. There are many Americans who don't vote, and that's been the case of all the elections that we've had recently. We've never had universal participation. It's okay. And let me be clear that if I want to comment on a political issue, when people say that if you don't vote, then you can't complain, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that, okay? That your First Amendment right supersedes any of that. And also, when people say that, oh, people who have died fighting to protect the country or have died in civil rights protests, like, how dare you, not honor their memory? Well, the thing is that their memory is about me being able to be free. Okay. And if somebody has laid down their life, they have done it for freedom. And if my freedom, if my pursuit of happiness, and remember this, ladies and gentlemen, that the most important thing that I can ever tell you is to pursue happiness. And that there is nothing that I can tell you that is more sacred than that. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and take a look at the chat. Okay. The YouTube chat, I'm sure, is very lit right now. And let's see what's going on and what people are saying. Does anybody have any questions for me? Oh my goodness, this thing is moving. Okay. I don't even know if I can see this. Okay, there is such a great thing going. I tell you what, if people have questions for me, at Tom Richey on Twitter. Okay, I'm on Twitter as at TomRichey. So go ahead and just shoot me a question on Twitter, because I'm not really able to see the chat. So let's see what's going on here. If anybody wants to ask me a question, then we'll go ahead and put that. All right. So as far as that goes, let me see if anything's come over. Okay. Oh, interesting. All right. So okay, we've got a few things here. Let's see. As far as that goes, all right. Irregardless, all right. Chad Lusk, what a great guy. Actually works in my district. All right. So as far as that goes, let me look on Twitter here. And Joseph says, Tom, in my humble opinion, you personify the profession. While I don't agree with all your positions, they are well researched, supported with facts. Instead of engaging in a dialogue, the easier path to take is just to attack and align yourself with a group. And that's really what I'm trying to get away from, and I'm glad that you see that. All right. So as far as that going, the First Amendment. Yes. Okay. Very good. Very good. And my friend Aguila, Publius Aguila on Twitter, he says that, yeah, I mean, if people want to call me a fraud or something like that, it's totally within their rights. I think that's great. The First Amendment certainly does protect that. Okay. If somebody wants to call me a fraud or anything that. All right. So Brad says, I prefer that you vote, but it is your right. However, if you don't vote, you do give up your right to complain about the government. Your vote is your voice, which I would say to Brad, I would say that my voice is my voice. And when it comes down to it, now, what I do believe is that I'm going to be less likely to complain if I don't vote. And maybe, see, here's the thing. Perhaps if I don't vote, then I will be more appreciative of my rights as an American and of how lucky I am to live in this country. Maybe I'll do something like the Operation American Gratitude, that I'll think about what can I do to help the community as a whole. So while I reserve my right to be critical of the government, whether I vote or not, I do want to go in other directions with my First Amendment rights. I want to go into what can I do to help my community. And so as far as that goes, thank you so much, B. Burke, for all of that, all of the kind words there. And let's see what we've got here. We've got a few notifications here. All right. Hannah's asking my opinion on casting blank ballots. That I think that that's kind of a waste of time. All right. So I think that somebody who's casting a blank ballot, the problem here is, and shout out to all my friends at Mercy who are just such great supporters. But the thing about casting a blank ballot is I actually spent the time to go stand in line and vote and cast a blank ballot, because I think part of that is the non-voter shaming that we're seeing, that when somebody doesn't vote, they're viewed as somebody that's less of an American or something like that. And so they want to avoid being shamed. And so they say, I voted, I cast a blank ballot. Now, what I tell students in my classroom, if I give a quiz on something they were supposed to read for homework, I tell them that if the person who didn't read closely, but spent some time with it, and they got a 2 on the quiz, they got 2 right on the quiz. And then there's somebody who didn't read at all, and they got 3 right on the quiz. Or let's say the other person got 2 right. Okay, both of them got 2 right. One of them spent time and the other one didn't. The one who didn't spend any time got a better return on their investment. So I think when it comes to blank ballots, I think that what kind of investment is that? What kind of message are you sending? And I think that time is the most valuable asset that we have. And so if you're thinking about that, if you're going to use your time, at least cast a ballot. Again, I am not trying to tell people not to vote. I just think that it's important that at least one teacher, and I'm sure other teachers are saying that as well, but at least one teacher is publicly saying, critically evaluate your voting decision. And so, yeah, Michael, it's always that's always something that is funny. Okay, but yes, I tell you. Now, let's see. All right, here in Clemson, that Dwayne, that's a good point. Okay, there is the city council, and that's where where like I was saying, Dwayne lives here in Clemson, and we're like a bunch of idiots on the city council. Well, are you going to replace them with another crop of idiots or something like that? But yes, gerrymandering is something that I think that for most people, their vote in a congressional election does not really carry a lot of weight because of the gerrymandering. And I think that it's okay to look at this through a rational lens. Okay, so as far as that goes, yes, time is valuable. Okay, yes, this thing is still moving very, very quickly, and y'all have got some interesting stuff to say. And with that, I think that I'm going to go ahead and turn off this broadcast. But yes, please go do your homework and all of that kind of stuff. And I will be back for some more academic stuff later, of course, this year. As y'all can see, I'm dabbling in AP government videos as well. So I'm going to try to get some more APUSH, AP Euro, AP government content out there. So y'all stay tuned. And remember, if you want to vote, please vote. If you don't want to vote, then don't let anybody shame you for that decision, as long as it's a decision that was made after doing some critical thinking and not just being lazy. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure.